It was a quiet gray morning when the sky seemed to hang low over the city. A light drizzle painted the windows of a black car moving slowly down an old country road. Inside the car sat a man in his late 60s, dressed neatly in a dark coat, his hands resting still on the steering wheel. His name was Raymond Cole, a man known to many as a billionaire, but to himself, he was simply a father who had lost the only person that ever truly mattered to him, his son. The car turned into the narrow lane that led to a small cemetery outside town. It was the place Raymond visited every month without fail. Even though he owned several businesses, private jets, and houses around the world, this quiet graveyard was the only place where he felt close to something real. He parked the car near a big oak tree, opened the door, and stepped out into the damp air. The cold wind brushed against his face, and he pulled his coat tighter before walking toward the familiar spot. The path was lined with wet leaves. The smell of earth and rain filled the air. His steps slowed as he reached a white marble stone standing among rows of others. He stopped and his eyes softened. The name carved on the stone was that of his son, Ethan Cole. Just seeing it made Raymond's chest tighten. It had been 2 years since the accident, but the pain hadn't faded. It only sat deeper, quieter, heavier. He knelt down, brushing away a few leaves that had settled at the base of the stone. From the bag he carried, he took out a bunch of white lilies, his son's favorite. He arranged them carefully, making sure every petal was facing the right way. Then he sat down on the small bench beside the grave. The rain had stopped, and a gentle silence wrapped around him. "Hey, kid," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm here again. I brought the lilies you liked." His fingers brushed the cold surface of the grave. "I still don't know how to talk to you without breaking apart. I keep thinking about that last phone call. How angry I was. I said things I didn't mean." He stopped for a moment, swallowing hard. The memories rushed back, the argument, the pride, the stubbornness. He had always pushed his son to be more, to think bigger, to follow in his footsteps. But Ethan had wanted something else, something simple. They had fought over it again and again until one day his son had left without looking back. And then, before they could make peace, the accident took him away forever. Raymond sat quietly for a while, staring at the flowers. The wind moved through the trees and the leaves whispered softly. "If I could just have one more chance," he said under his breath. "One chance to tell you I'm proud of you, even if you didn't want my world." He sighed deeply and closed his eyes. The sound of footsteps broke the stillness. He opened his eyes slowly and turned his head slightly. A woman was walking along the path, holding a small child in her arms. She was dressed in a simple brown coat and worn-out shoes. Her hair was tied back loosely, and her face looked tired, as if the world had been too heavy on her shoulders. Raymond watched as she stopped a few steps away, near the same grave. His eyebrows drew together. She didn't seem like someone visiting a nearby stone. She was standing right in front of his son's. The woman knelt down, placing a small bunch of wildflowers beside his lilies. The little boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, clung to her neck quietly. She held him close and began whispering something to him, words that Raymond couldn't quite hear. He felt a strange tug in his chest. He didn't know her, but something about the way she cried, softly, holding back tears so the child wouldn't see, felt deeply familiar. Her shoulders trembled, but she didn't let go of the boy. Raymond took a step back, unsure whether to approach or stay quiet. He didn't want to intrude on someone else's grief. But why was she crying at his son's grave? Who was she? The little boy looked at the flowers and reached out to touch them. His small fingers brushed against the marble stone, and he said something that made Raymond's heart skip. The child said, "Mama, is he in heaven now?" The woman nodded and hugged him tightly. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "He's watching over you." Raymond stood frozen. The words echoed in his mind. "Watching over you?" He felt his pulse quicken. Was she talking about Ethan? But how would she know him? His throat felt dry, and for a moment he thought of asking her. But he stopped himself. Something inside told him it wasn't the right time. Instead, he turned away slowly, walking back toward his car. When he glanced back once more, she was still kneeling there, her head bowed, the little boy's arms around her neck. Driving home, Raymond couldn't stop thinking about them. The image of the woman and the child kept replaying in his mind. He had seen many faces over the years, employees, partners, even strangers asking for help. But this was different. There had been a kind of pain in her eyes that felt real, raw, and connected somehow to his own. He wanted to forget it, but he couldn't. When he reached his large, empty house, the silence greeted him like it always did. The walls were lined with art. The floors shone like glass, but none of it mattered. He walked into his study and sat in the chair behind the big desk. The city lights blinked outside the window. He took off his glasses and rubbed his face, feeling the weight of loneliness press on him again. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at the photo on his desk, his son smiling beside a car they had restored together years ago. Ethan's laughter almost echoed in his ears. He looked so alive in that picture, so full of light. Raymond whispered, "Who was that woman, Ethan? And why was she there with a child?" He knew he could easily find out. With the kind of power and influence he had, a few phone calls would give him every detail about her. But for some reason, he didn't want to. Not yet. He wanted to see her again on his own, without questions or walls. Maybe she was just someone who had known Ethan. Maybe she was a friend. Or maybe... He didn't even dare to finish the thought. The next few days passed in silence. Raymond went to work as usual, sitting through meetings, nodding at presentations, pretending to listen while his mind drifted elsewhere. Each evening when he returned home, he would catch himself staring at the same photograph. His heart felt restless, like something unfinished was calling out to him. Finally, one afternoon, he decided to visit the cemetery again. The air was clearer this time, and the sun peeked through the clouds. When he arrived, he looked around, half hoping, half ashamed that he was searching for her. But she wasn't there. He stood by the grave for a while, talking to his son in a quiet voice. Then, as he was about to leave, an old groundskeeper passed by. Raymond stopped him and asked gently, "Do you ever see a young woman here? She usually comes with a small boy." The old man nodded. "Oh, yes, sir. She comes often. Always brings wildflowers. Sits for a while, talks to the little one. They're good people. Don't bother anyone." Raymond nodded slowly, thanking him, but inside his curiosity deepened. Who was she to his son? And what made her cry like that? Later that day, Raymond stopped by a small cafe near the cemetery for coffee. It was a quiet place tucked between an old bookstore and a flower shop. He sat by the window, still lost in thought. After a while, the waitress came to take his order. When he looked up, he froze for a second. It was her, the same woman from the graveyard. She looked different under the warm cafe light, less sad, though her eyes still carried that gentle tiredness. She smiled politely and asked, "What can I get you, sir?" Raymond hesitated, trying not to seem startled. "Just a black coffee," he replied softly. She nodded, wrote it down, and walked away. Her name tag read Lila. He watched her move between tables, serving customers with quiet grace. There was no trace of bitterness in her, just quiet strength. A small boy sat at a corner table, drawing on a napkin with crayons. It was the same child from the cemetery. He looked up and smiled at her every now and then, and she smiled back with warmth that melted everything around her. Raymond felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, curiosity, and something like hope. He didn't know what brought her into his son's life or why fate had placed them both at his son's grave that morning. But he knew one thing for certain: their story was somehow tied to his. And for the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, a quiet pull to understand, to know, to finally face the past he had buried along with his son. He finished his coffee slowly, watching the small moments between mother and child. When he left, he placed a generous tip on the table but said nothing. As he stepped out into the cool evening air, he turned back once more. Through the cafe window, he could see the boy laughing as his mother fixed his jacket. It was a simple, ordinary moment, but to Raymond it felt like the beginning of something that might just change everything. Raymond couldn't stop thinking about the woman from the cafe. After that first encounter, her face kept appearing in his mind. The tired smile, the way she spoke softly to her child, the sadness behind her eyes. He didn't know why she affected him so deeply, but something about her felt connected to the emptiness he carried inside. He told himself it was just curiosity. Maybe she had known Ethan. Maybe she was just another person whose life had crossed paths with his son's for a short while. Still, he found himself driving back to that same cafe the next morning. He sat at the same table by the window, pretending to read the newspaper while his eyes searched for her. She was there again, wearing a plain white shirt and an apron. Her hair was tied back neatly this time, and she was busy taking orders from customers. She moved quickly, balancing trays with ease, smiling whenever someone thanked her. Her little boy sat quietly at a corner table, drawing with colored pencils. Every few minutes, she'd glance at him with that same gentle care that had stayed with Raymond since he saw them at the graveyard. When she finally walked up to his table, she recognized him. "Good morning, sir," she said kindly. "You were here yesterday, right?" Raymond smiled faintly. "Yes, the coffee was good," he replied. "Thought I'd stop by again," she nodded. "That's nice to hear. Would you like the same today?" He nodded, watching her write down the order before walking away. He noticed how she greeted every customer with patience, even when they were rude or dismissive. Her tone never changed. There was something strong about her quietness, something that reminded him of Ethan's calm nature. He couldn't help but think about his son again, how much they had argued, how different they had been, yet how much they had loved each other despite it all. When she returned with his coffee, he decided to speak. "I saw you at the cemetery the other day," he said softly. Her hand froze for a second before she set the cup down carefully. She looked at him, unsure whether to respond. "I hope I didn't intrude," he added quickly. "I was visiting my son's grave." Her eyes softened a little. "Oh," she said quietly. "I was there with my little boy." She paused as if choosing her words. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." "You didn't," Raymond assured her. "I just noticed you were at the same grave." "My son's name was Ethan." The woman blinked, her lips parting slightly. For a brief moment she looked startled. Then she lowered her gaze and whispered, "Ethan?" "Yes," Raymond said. "You knew him?" There was silence between them. The sound of the coffee machine filled the room, and people talked softly around them. Finally she nodded. "Yes," she said slowly. "I knew him. A long time ago." Raymond's heart began to pound. "How did you know him?" he asked carefully. She looked away, her voice quiet. "He was very kind to me," she said. "We met a few years ago. He helped me when I was struggling. He was the only one who ever made me feel like I mattered." She smiled faintly, but her eyes glistened. He talked a lot about wanting to make his father proud. Raymond felt a sharp sting in his chest. He wanted to ask more, but she was called by another customer, so she excused herself and walked away. He sat there stunned, staring at the steam rising from his coffee. The way she had spoken his son's name, it wasn't casual. It was filled with emotion, like she had loved him. He stayed longer that day, watching quietly as she worked. Her boy sitting nearby looked up and caught Raymond's gaze. The child smiled shyly. He had bright eyes and a small dimple on one cheek. For a second, Raymond's breath caught. Something about that smile felt achingly familiar. It was the same smile his son had when he was little. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe he was just imagining it, driven by grief and longing. Still, the thought wouldn't leave him. Over the next few weeks, Raymond became a regular at the cafe. Sometimes he came in for breakfast, sometimes just for a coffee, always sitting by the same window. The woman, whose name he now knew was Lila, started recognizing him. They began to talk a little more each day. She told him she had been working there for nearly 3 years. It wasn't easy, but it paid the bills. She didn't have family nearby, so it was just her and her son. The boy's name was Leo. Raymond asked about the child once. "He seems like a smart little guy," he said, smiling. Lila smiled proudly. "He is. He loves cars and drawing. He says he wants to be an engineer one day." That made Raymond's heart twist. Ethan had loved cars too. He had spent hours in the garage as a boy, fixing old engines, taking things apart just to see how they worked. The memory came back so clearly that it almost hurt. One evening, when the cafe was nearly empty, Raymond stayed behind after closing time to pay his bill. Lila was cleaning tables. He hesitated before speaking. "You said you knew my son," he said quietly. "Did you know him well?" She stopped wiping and looked at him. Her eyes softened again, but there was pain there too. "Yes," she said after a pause. "I knew him very well." Raymond waited, but she didn't say more. "He never told me much about his personal life," he said. "He was private." "I can understand that," she murmured. Then with a deep breath she said, "We were together for a while. Before he..." She trailed off, unable to finish. Raymond's heart dropped. He had suspected it, but hearing it still shook him. His throat tightened and he looked down, trying to steady his voice. "You were in a relationship with him?" "Yes," she said softly, "but his family didn't approve." He told me once that his father wanted him to focus on the business, not on me. I think that hurt him a lot. Raymond felt his stomach turn. He wanted to say something, but guilt flooded him instead. He remembered how harsh he had been with Ethan when he found out about the girl he was seeing. He had judged her without even meeting her, assuming she was after money. He had said words that still haunted him. "You'll ruin your life over someone who doesn't belong in our world." Now, looking at her, working late, raising a child alone, humble but strong, he realized how wrong he'd been. "I didn't know," he whispered. Lila gave a small, sad smile. "He didn't want you to. He didn't want to make things worse. He said he'd fix everything first, that one day you'd understand." Her voice trembled slightly. She looked down at the table and blinked back tears. "He was supposed to meet me that night," she said quietly. "But he never came. I found out about the accident the next day." The words cut through Raymond like a knife. He didn't know what to say. For the first time in years, he felt completely powerless. She turned away, taking a deep breath. "Anyway," she said softly, "that was a long time ago. I'm just trying to move on now. Life doesn't stop for anyone." Raymond nodded slowly, his heart heavy. He paid his bill and left, walking to his car in silence. The night air was cool, but he barely felt it. Her words echoed in his mind all the way home. When he reached his house, he went straight to his son's old room. The door hadn't been opened in years. Dust covered the shelves, but everything was still where Ethan had left it. His books, his tools, a few pictures on the desk. Raymond sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at an old photo album. He flipped through it until he reached the last few pages. There were pictures of Ethan smiling beside a young woman. Her face was younger, but unmistakable. It was Lila. In one photo, she was holding something in her hand. A small test with 2 lines. A pregnancy test. Raymond froze. His hands began to shake. He turned the page and there was another picture. Ethan's arm around her, both of them smiling at the camera. On the back of the photo, in his son's handwriting, were the words, "For our little family." The truth hit him like a storm. The child wasn't just anyone's son. That boy at the cafe, the one with the dimple and the same smile, was Ethan's child, his grandson. Raymond sat there for a long time, staring at the photos. Tears rolled down his cheeks, though he didn't even notice. All the years he had spent alone, drowning in guilt and pride, and all this time, his son's family had been right there, struggling, surviving without his help. He pressed his hands against his face and whispered, "What have I done?" Outside, the city lights shimmered, but his house felt darker than ever. Somewhere across town, a young mother was tucking her son into bed, humming softly as he drifted to sleep. And Raymond Cole, a man who had everything money could buy, sat in the silence of his mansion, realizing that what he wanted most had been something money could never bring back: family. Raymond couldn't sleep that night. He kept pacing the floor, holding the old photograph in his hands. His heart was heavy, his mind full of memories. The picture of Ethan and Lila smiling together, and that small test in her hand played again and again in his head. The words written on the back, "For our little family," cut through him like glass. He sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the photo until his eyes blurred with tears. All this time, his son had been trying to build a life of his own, to love someone, to be happy. And Raymond, with all his pride and rules, had pushed him away. He had always thought he was protecting Ethan from disappointment, but now he realized he had been protecting his own ego instead. The guilt was unbearable. He had lost his son, and because of that same pride, he had also lost the chance to know his grandson. He stayed up until dawn, going through the boxes of Ethan's things he had stored away after the accident. There were letters, some sketches, and a few notes. He found one letter written in his son's handwriting but never sent. The envelope had Lila's name on it. His hands trembled as he opened it. The letter was short. "Lila, I'm sorry for what my father said. I'll fix everything. I promise. I love you and I want to be there for you and our baby. I'll talk to him again once things settle down. Please don't lose faith in me." Raymond pressed the paper against his chest. His son had been trying to make things right. He just never got the chance. The next day, Raymond went back to the cafe. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he needed to see them again. When he walked in, Lila was behind the counter serving a couple of regular customers. She smiled when she saw him, not knowing the storm that was brewing inside him. Good morning, she greeted softly. The usual coffee? He nodded. Yes, please. He sat down, watching her move around the cafe. Every gesture reminded him of his son somehow. The calm way she handled things, the quiet strength in her eyes. Leo, her little boy, was sitting in the corner again, drawing with colored pencils. When their eyes met, the boy gave him a small, curious smile. Raymond smiled back, but his heart was pounding. He wanted to reach out, to hold the boy, to tell him everything. But how could he? How could he explain years of pride and mistakes? When Lila brought him the coffee, he decided to ask. Lila, he began quietly, do you ever talk to your son about his father? She hesitated, looking down. Sometimes, she said softly. He asks questions I don't always know how to answer. I tell him his father was kind, brave, and that he loved him very much. Raymond's throat tightened. He looks a lot like him, he said carefully. Lila smiled faintly. Yes, every time he smiles, I see Ethan. He stared at her, the confirmation hitting him like a wave. There was no doubt anymore. That child was Ethan's son, his grandson. The truth was sitting right there in front of him, sipping juice and drawing a picture of a car. He took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Lila, he said slowly, there's something I need to tell you. His voice shook slightly, and she noticed. She looked at him, her expression curious and cautious. What is it? But before he could speak, a few customers walked in. The moment slipped away. Lila excused herself to take their orders, and Raymond sat back, torn between fear and hope. Maybe this wasn't the right time. Maybe he needed to approach it differently. He didn't want to frighten her or bring back painful memories all at once. He left the cafe quietly that day, deciding he'd find a better way to tell her the truth. But he couldn't stay away for long. Over the next week, he kept visiting, sometimes buying breakfast for Leo, sometimes helping Lila carry supplies when the cafe was busy. Slowly, they began to talk more like friends. One afternoon, while the cafe was nearly empty, Leo ran up to Raymond holding a small drawing. Look, the boy said proudly. It's my car. Raymond smiled. The drawing showed a bright red car with 3 stick figures inside. One of them was labeled Mama, another me, and the third one had no name. Who's that? Raymond asked gently, pointing to the third figure. Leo looked up and said simply, That's my dad. Mama says he's in heaven. The words were innocent, but they broke Raymond's heart. He forced a smile. It's a beautiful picture, he said softly, and Leo grinned, happy with the praise. Leela watched from behind the counter, a hint of sadness in her eyes. When Raymond looked up, their eyes met for a moment. She smiled, but he could see the ache behind it. That evening, when the cafe closed, Raymond offered to walk her and Leo to the bus stop. It was late and the streets were quiet. Lila agreed. The 3 of them walked together under the streetlights. Leo held both their hands, chatting cheerfully about his favorite cartoons and the toy car he wanted for his birthday. Raymond listened, his heart full and heavy at the same time. When they reached the bus stop, Raymond hesitated. Lila, he said, his voice low, I found something you should see. It's about Ethan. She looked surprised. About Ethan? He nodded. Would you come by my house tomorrow? I think it's time you knew. She hesitated, unsure. I don't know if that's a good idea. It's important, he said quietly. For you and for your son. She looked at him for a long moment, then finally nodded. All right, she whispered. Tomorrow. The next day when she arrived, Raymond welcomed her into the large, silent house. The place felt colder than he remembered, the walls filled with photos of his past life. He led her into the study, where he had placed the photo album and the letter on the table. She looked around nervously, holding her hands together. This house is beautiful, she said softly. Ethan once told me his father's home was like a palace. Raymond gave a sad smile. It never felt like one, he said. He motioned toward the table. Lila, I need to be honest with you, he began. 2 nights ago I found something among Ethan's things. He handed her the letter. Her eyes widened when she saw her name on it. Her hands shook as she opened it and began to read. When she finished, tears filled her eyes. I never got this, she whispered. He was going to meet me that night. Raymond nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. He loved you, and he wanted to make things right. She covered her mouth, crying softly. I thought he stopped caring, she said between tears. When I didn't hear from him, I thought he'd given up. Raymond shook his head. No, it wasn't that. I was the one who stopped him. His voice broke. I told him to stay away from you. I thought you were after our money. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Lila looked up at him, stunned. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The room felt painfully still. Finally, she said quietly, You kept him away from us? Raymond nodded, tears running down his face. I thought I was doing the right thing for him. But all I did was take away his happiness and yours. She sat down slowly, wiping her eyes. He used to tell me his father was strict, she said softly. But he also said he wanted to make peace with you one day. He wanted to show you that love didn't have to come with conditions. Raymond sat down across from her. His voice trembled as he said, I know now. And I can never undo what's been done. But there's something else you should know. He reached for the photo album and opened it to the last page, the picture of her and Ethan together, smiling with the pregnancy test. Lila gasped, touching the photo gently. Where did you find this? It was in his things, Raymond said. He kept it safe. He was proud. He wanted to be a father. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. He never got to meet his son, she whispered. Raymond's voice broke as he said, But I want to. If you'll let me. I'd like to know him. I'd like to be in his life. Not as a rich man, not out of guilt, just as his grandfather. Lila sat quietly for a long time. She looked at the photo again, then at Raymond. There was pain in her eyes, but also understanding.
He's a good boy, she said softly.
He asks about his dad all the time. Maybe it's time he knows where he comes from. Raymond nodded, his eyes glistening. Please, let me make things right. The next day when he went to the cafe, Leo ran up to him again. This time Raymond knelt down, his heart full. The boy's innocent smile warmed him in a way he hadn't felt in years. Hey there, champ, he said gently. How would you like to visit me sometime? I have a big garden with lots of space to play. Leo's eyes lit up.
Really?
He asked, excited. Lila stood behind the counter, watching. She nodded quietly. You can go, she said softly. And in that simple moment, just a small nod, a boy's bright smile, and an old man's trembling heart, something began to heal inside Raymond. He knew it would take time to earn trust, to make up for lost years. But for the first time in a very long time, he felt like life was giving him another chance. Not through money or success, but through love he had almost thrown away. Raymond couldn't sleep that night. The truth he had uncovered kept echoing in his head like an unending storm. The image of the young woman, Lila, holding her son at the grave played again and again in his mind. That little boy, the one with soft brown eyes and a smile that looked so much like Ethan's. It was too much to take in. He sat by his window, staring at the city lights far below, realizing that for years he had been living with half of the truth. His son had left behind something he never knew existed, a grandson. He felt a strange mixture of joy and guilt. Joy because a part of his son was still alive. Guilt because his pride and coldness had kept him from knowing the truth sooner. He remembered the day Ethan had come home years ago, talking about a girl he had fallen in love with. Raymond hadn't even asked her name. He'd just dismissed it. You're too young, he'd said. You need to focus on your future, not on girls who want what you have. Those words now felt like poison on his tongue. The next morning, Raymond drove to the cafe again. It was still early and the place was half empty. Lila was behind the counter arranging cups and trays. When she saw him, she looked a little surprised but smiled politely. Good morning, Mr. Cole, she said softly. He nodded and took a seat by the window. For a few minutes, he just watched her move around. How she handled everything calmly, how she smiled at customers even when she looked tired. It broke his heart to think she had gone through everything alone. When she brought his coffee, he spoke gently. Do you get any help with your son? She shook her head with a small smile. No, it's just me and him. But he's a good boy. He doesn't make things hard for me. Raymond looked at her carefully. It must be difficult. Lila paused for a second, then nodded. Some days are harder than others, but I try to stay strong. For him. She looked out the window, her voice dropping. His father would have wanted that. Raymond's hands tightened around the cup. He could feel his chest ache again. He wanted to tell her everything right there, but the words refused to come out. He didn't want to overwhelm her or make her think he was intruding. Instead, he asked, Can I meet your son one day? I think he's a wonderful kid. Lila looked uncertain. You really don't have to do that. I want to, he said softly. He reminds me of someone. That afternoon when her shift ended, she returned with her little boy. The child had a small backpack and a smile that could light up a room. "This is Leo," she said gently. Leo waved shyly. "Hi, sir." Raymond bent down to his level and smiled. "Hi, Leo, that's a strong name you've got there." The boy grinned, showing a missing front tooth. "Mom says my dad picked it." Raymond's heart skipped. His son had picked the name. He swallowed hard and nodded. "Then your dad had good taste." They talked for a while. Raymond bought Leo a hot chocolate and listened as the boy told him about his school and how he wanted to be an airplane pilot. Every word Leo said made the truth feel more real. This was Ethan's son, his grandson. When they said goodbye, Lila thanked him for being kind. Raymond smiled but felt the weight of everything he hadn't yet said. That night he made a decision. He couldn't hide anymore. Lila deserved to know who he really was. The next evening he went back to the cafe, but this time he waited until closing hours. The rain had started again, tapping softly against the glass. Lila was cleaning the tables when he approached her. "Lila," he began quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked at him, puzzled. "Is something wrong?" He took a deep breath. "I know who you are, I know. You were with my son." The cloth in her hand froze. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she didn't move. Then she whispered, "Your son?" "Yes," he said, his voice trembling. "Ethan Cole, he was my son." The room went silent except for the rain. Lila looked at him in disbelief, then stepped back slightly. "You're his father?" Raymond nodded slowly. "I am, and I didn't know about you." "I didn't know about Leo, His voice cracked. "I only found out a few days ago. I went through his things." "I saw your picture." Lila's eyes filled with tears. She turned away, trying to steady her breathing. "I tried to reach you," she said quietly. "When I found out I was pregnant, I called your office. But your secretary said you weren't interested. That I shouldn't bother you." Raymond's throat burned. He closed his eyes for a moment. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I was wrong. I was proud and I didn't listen. I thought I was protecting him, but I only pushed him away." Lila didn't speak for a while. She just stood there, her hands shaking. Finally, she said, "I never wanted anything from you. I just wanted Ethan to know he was going to be a father. But then he died and I didn't want to drag up the past." Raymond's voice softened. "You should have told me after. I would have helped you." She turned to him, eyes red but calm. "Would you?" she asked quietly. "Back then you didn't even believe I existed. You thought he was too young, too foolish to love someone like me. What would you have done if I showed up with his child?" Her words pierced him. He had no answer. He had been so blinded by wealth and reputation that he never thought about the real people behind his son's choices. He lowered his head. "You're right. I can't change what I did. But I can try to make things right now if you'll let me." There was silence between them. Then a small voice broke it. "Mom!" They both turned. Leo was standing near the door holding his little toy plane. He looked sleepy and confused. Lila wiped her eyes quickly and called him over. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're just talking." Leo looked at Raymond curiously. "Are you crying?" Raymond knelt down, forcing a smile. "Maybe a little. Sometimes grown-ups cry too." Leo nodded seriously. "That's okay. Mom says it's good to cry." Raymond chuckled softly, tears slipping down his cheeks. "She's very smart." Then Leo tilted his head and asked innocently, "Are you my grandpa?" Lila froze. Her eyes darted to Raymond's. The air felt still for a moment. Raymond took a slow breath and whispered, "Yes, Leo, I am." The boy blinked, then smiled as if he had just solved a small mystery. "That's cool," he said simply. He hugged his toy plane tighter. "I always wanted a grandpa." Lila covered her mouth, tears streaming down again. Raymond felt something break inside him, something heavy and cold that had lived in his heart for years. He reached out and gently touched the boy's shoulder. "And I always wanted another chance," he said softly. From that night, things began to change. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. Lila didn't instantly forgive him, and Raymond didn't expect her to. But he kept showing up. Every morning, he would come to the cafe for breakfast. Sometimes he would bring a small gift for Leo, a book, a toy car, or just a fresh muffin from the bakery down the street. He didn't try to impress them with money. He just wanted to be there, to earn their trust slowly. Lila watched him closely. Over time, she began to see the difference in his eyes. He wasn't the same proud man who once turned away from her son. He was softer now, quieter, carrying the weight of regret but also the hope of redemption. One evening after closing, she invited him to sit with them for dinner. It was a simple meal, soup, bread, and tea, but to Raymond it felt like the most precious invitation he had ever received. They laughed a little, talked about small things, and for a brief moment he felt like he was part of a family again. When he left that night, Lila said quietly, "I'm not ready to forget the past, but I can see you're trying. Maybe that's enough for now." Raymond smiled, his heart full. "It's more than I deserve," he said softly. As he drove home, he thought about how different things could have been if he had only listened to his son back then. But now he had a second chance, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. The days turned into weeks, and the quiet bond between Raymond, Lila, and little Leo grew stronger. It wasn't the kind of bond that formed overnight. It built slowly, through small gestures, through unspoken kindness, through the kind of warmth that comes only when hearts are trying to heal. Every morning Raymond would stop by the cafe. He'd order the same black coffee, but the real reason he came was to see them. Sometimes Leo would run to him with his tiny backpack, proudly showing a drawing he made at school. Sometimes Lila would smile shyly and tell him that Leo had been asking when Grandpa Ray would visit again. Each time she said it, something deep in Raymond's heart softened. He started picking up Leo from school on days when Lila had long shifts. The first time he did it, Leo held his hand all the way to the car. "Mom says you used to be rich," Leo said in his innocent voice. Raymond chuckled. "Used to be?" Leo grinned. "Yeah, but now you buy ice cream like normal people." Raymond laughed so hard he could barely drive. That one small comment made him realize how simple happiness could be. For years he had measured his life in profits and numbers. Now, he measured it in smiles, drawings, and little hands holding his. Still, there were moments of silence between him and Lila, moments heavy with the weight of the past. Sometimes she would go quiet when his car pulled up, and he could sense the memories she was trying to hide. Raymond never forced her to talk. He just stayed patient, knowing that real forgiveness takes time. One evening, after closing the cafe, Lila sat with him on the steps outside. The sky was turning orange and the wind carried the smell of rain. "You know," she said softly, "Ethan used to talk about you all the time. Even after you argued, he said he believed you loved him deep down." Raymond stared at the streetlights flickering on. "I did, I just didn't know how to show it. I thought I was protecting him, but I was really protecting my pride." She looked at him quietly, then said, "Leo deserves to know about his father, but I think he also deserves to know his grandfather. So whatever happens, I want you to be part of his life." Raymond turned to her, emotion thick in his throat. "Thank you," he said. "That means more than you'll ever know." After that night, they became a small family in every way that mattered. Raymond would take Leo to the park where they'd race on the grass or feed ducks by the pond. Sometimes other parents would recognize him from the news, an old photograph of the billionaire who once owned half the city's skyline. But Raymond didn't care anymore. He wasn't there to be admired. He was there to be a grandfather. Lila watched them often, smiling from a distance. She saw how gentle he was with Leo, how patient, how different from the man she had once feared. Slowly her walls began to crumble. She started trusting him, not because of his name, but because of how he treated her son. One Sunday afternoon, Raymond invited them both to visit a small house he owned outside the city. It had been empty for years, surrounded by trees and a wide garden that Ethan used to love. The house was peaceful, with a swing on the porch and sunlight spilling through big windows. "I haven't been here since Ethan was alive," Raymond said quietly. "He used to run through that garden when he was little. I thought maybe you both could use it. It's quiet, safe, a good place for Leo." Lila looked around. The house wasn't grand or modern like his mansion in the city. It was simple, warm, with old furniture and the smell of wood. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "But I don't know if—" Raymond stopped her gently. "You don't owe me anything. I just want you both to have a place that feels like home." She looked at him, eyes shining. "You're really trying, aren't you?" He smiled sadly. "It's all I can do now." Within a few weeks, Lila agreed to move in. Not because she wanted a new house, but because she wanted Leo to grow up where he could play freely, without the noise of the city. The day they moved, Leo ran through the garden laughing, chasing butterflies. Raymond stood by the porch watching with tears in his eyes. "Look at him," Lila said quietly beside him. "He's never had a backyard before." "He's got one now," Raymond said, smiling faintly. "And so much more."